Dax Flame, from a certain point of view, seems a curious remnant of a bygone age of the internet. Gaining fame in the early days of YouTube, he established himself as a unique online personality that attracted widespread attention. This online fame eventually led to the beginnings of a career in acting, featuring most prominently in 21 Jump Street, but also several other roles. In the late 2010s, film work dried up, and Dax's prospects took a less promising turn. However, the memory of his unique imprint on the history of the internet remained. My first introduction to Dax Flame was through iDubbbz TV's documentary about him, which was released in 2019. This shed fresh light on the nature of Dax's experience of fame and the quirks of his personality that endeared him to so many viewers those years ago. Awkward, exaggerated, and theatrical, Dax's performances in his videos led many to question who the man behind them really was. This was the central premise of iDubbbz's investigation into him, what was real and what was part of the character of Dax Flame. This was also the central question of my approach to reading his book, which gave its name to the documentary, Ice Cream Man. Ice Cream Man is ostensibly a rough collection of notes and observations of the author over the course of a summer working as a scooper at a Los Angeles ice cream parlor. It was published in 2019. Its structure is unconventional, with its chapters not necessarily having any connection to those preceding or following, and at just under 70 pages, it in no way could be described as a novel. It sits somewhere in between the conventional short story and novella in terms of its length. Ice Cream Man's plot is bound together by very loose threads, which thematically tie its disparate observations together. Chapters can vary from a couple of pages to only a few sentences in length. Some are diarized and give us a sense of chronology, others are just notes or remembrances. To review Ice Cream Man, rather than going through the book chapter by chapter, I've categorized its main aspects into 3 threads. Given it's the thread that most of the text is given over to, and that it's in the book's title, let's start with the job.
I've been working at the shop for 9 months now. We got a new general manager 3 months ago. In the past month, I've asked him for a raise twice. I've also asked him for a promotion to shift manager twice. The last time I asked, he told me not to ask anymore until the end of summer, but that we'd discuss some new position at the performance review the following week.
At the beginning of Ice Cream Man, we find our protagonist, Dax, getting increasingly frustrated. Despite his diligence at work, his requests for a raise or for promotion are repeatedly ignored by his manager. This conflict manifests itself in numerous situations within the ice cream parlor. The first scene we're given is Peppermint Patty. A man and his wife enter the ice cream parlor. Dax gives him his peppermint ice cream and turns to his wife when the man lets out a scream. He's dropped his ice cream. When they pay and leave, we get an observation from Dax that typifies the way he conceives of the world and the people around him. He begins to judge the man for his exaggerated reaction, but pushes back against that impulse.
But then I made myself realize that people are just doing their best and you can't judge them. Maybe he had parents that yelled at him for spilling things when he was little, and now that's one of his biggest challenges. Or maybe the shirt he was wearing was a very special gift from his wife, or a dead relative. You never know what past a person has or what's in their head.
The difficulties of the job are elaborated on more in the following chapters. Specifically, Dax is having a hard time getting his manager to listen to him. He's told that short of a promotion to manager, he can have the position of senior scooper for an extra $1 per hour. He'll have to wait until the end of summer for that, however. Amidst all of this, he's working diligently and going above and beyond to try and impress the management. Still, recognition is not forthcoming.
I sometimes feel like the only way they'd realize the value I offer is if I quit, because then they'd see what they'd lost.
The ice cream parlor's owners are a middle-aged couple from across the country, who run the company as a chain. as part of his efforts to improve his situation, Dax draws a picture of the couple and sends it to them. They respond, saying that they loved it. He thinks of more explicitly asking them to intervene with the management of his store, but decides against it. A major point of conflict in the thread of Dax's job woes is the case of the ice cream parlor's sandwich board. Dax takes it upon himself to draw in chalk on the board and display it on the street. On one side he draws another picture of the owners, on the other he writes "Mom and Pop Style Experience." Coming into work the next day, Dax finds that his message and the drawing have been replaced. Dax knows from the handwriting that it was the assistant manager that erased his work. He goes to clear the board and redraw the owners. He erases the assistant manager's message, but stops himself from drawing. He goes to her, tells her the board is blank, and asks what he should draw on it. She asks him why it's blank. He admits he erased her message. She apologizes for erasing his drawing and asks Dax to replace what she'd written.
I said yes and also apologized for erasing her drawing, and I felt kind of embarrassed, but also felt good that the air had been cleared.
However, despite this resolution with the summer drawing on, Dax concludes that he needs something new. He prints off resumes and hands them out to local businesses, but secures only a couple of unsuccessful interviews. The grind of the job also brings to a halt his efforts to secure a promotion. And so we reach the infamous sabotage chapter, as Dax attempts to rebel in the small ways that are available to him. Even though there's some small malice in the minor acts of hiding equipment, incorrectly entering sales, and giving out free ice cream, still Dax's relentless optimism in the face of his crushing position shines through.
The dream is, I sell a screenplay and hire all my coworkers to be PAs on it, and I give them all jobs and they quit the ice cream job, and the new GM is fired because the owners of the company realize he's an awful manager who can't manage our morale.
This isn't to say that optimism wins every time though. Dax describes talking with his manager as they unpack a shipment of dry ice, playing with the steam. The manager says that he loves dry ice.
As soon as he went upstairs, I threw the dry ice in the trash.
Dax goes on to elaborate more on how the grind of the ice cream parlor detracts from his life as a whole. One week he has Saturday and Tuesday as his days off, and decides to call in sick for Sunday and Monday. He describes how leisurely he spent this free time and what a relief it was from the tedium of his job. In the next chapter he talks about fitness. He says that he's in good health, however this is in spite of his job interfering with his sleep at times. Dax's pessimistic impulse comes to a head during the visit of the health inspector. Dax plans, in detail, everything that he could do to get the store an F.
But I didn't. I just simply cleaned everything up, helped the customers, and did my best to get us an A+. And it worked. The health inspector said, "Everything is clean, I have no notes at all."
Dax sends another email to the manager asking for a promotion. He doesn't get a reply back. Finally, at the end of summer, Dax manages to get a meeting with the manager. It becomes clear to him during this meeting that he's never going to get the promotion. He emails the owners, hoping they'll intercede on his behalf, but it's clear that by now, his patience with the ice cream parlor is at an end.
I also finally received another response to one of the resumes I sent out. A new restaurant nearby wants to interview me Friday for a host or server position.
One morning, he reflects on his feelings about the state of his life. Despite having to work that night, he expresses gratitude for the moment and for life.
My Saturday morning apartment is sunny, the music is pretty, the AC is a miracle. I love life.
The saga of Dax's time at the ice cream parlor ends with a repeating line.
Curly-haired ice cream man, 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 curly-haired ice cream man. I used to be extremely famous on YouTube, 16th most subscribed of all time. It was 2007 and I was 15. A few years later, I was cast in a Warner Brothers movie called Project X, and a year after that, I acted in 21 Jump Street. I was paid $40,000 for each role. but somewhere along the way something went wrong, my career dried up, and now I'm 27 and working as an ice cream man.
The second thread that runs through Ice Cream Man is fame, or Dax's career. I make a distinction between job and career because that's also something that's at the core of this book, and that I think makes it deeply relatable. Dax's struggle to achieve what he loves doing amidst the struggle of working passionless employment just to live. He strives for self-actualization in the small ways afforded to him by his current circumstances, which, unless you're a part of the tiny fraction of people that have already made it, we can all empathise with. After the mention of his bygone fame in the opening, the next section we're given of Dax elaborating on the subject is titled Hair. He hasn't had a haircut in a long while. In fact, he's sworn to himself that he won't get it cut until he achieves either a promotion, a raise, or moves forward with his ambition of breaking into the film industry. Part of why Dax becomes so disillusioned with his manager in the dry ice chapter, and throws said dry ice away, is because of an exchange they have regarding his hair. Dax compliments his manager's haircut, and in return his manager says that the long hair looks good on him.
But it felt like he was slapping me in the face. It felt like he was saying, I know why you're growing your hair out. Keep it growing. Your position as scooper suits you.
Dax explains that he originally grew his hair out for a role in a friend's short film, which he wanted to propel him back into acting. Here we get a slightly humorous anecdote about Dax wanting to get a haircut, and his friend asking him not to.
Since I was in a wild mood and kind of freaking out a bit, I texted her this lie. Unfortunately, my grandpa passed away this year, and it's something we do in my family where every Christmas the oldest man in the family gives a haircut to all the other men in the family. And normally I might be able to say, I'm going to sit it out this year, but since my grandpa died, this will be my dad's first time to be the oldest man in the family, and so it will be very special for him, and I don't want to sit it out. I wish we could, but can we just do it like this?
Dax resolves to keep the hair and makes his vow that he won't cut it until he moves forward. Meanwhile, Dax is working on a screenplay for a film called Toby. He shows it to his agent, who likes it, but is skeptical about whether it could get funding. He recommends that Dax write a narrative pilot, but all Dax has for now is a single game show idea. We then turn to a general observation about the concept of karma and past lives. Dax recalls how a friend who is into spirituality explained to him the concept of the universal law of karma that carries over from all your actions, including past lives. She tells him that his lack of progress and the negativity that he's experienced could be due to the actions of a past self, and that simply needs to be balanced out with good karma. Dax says that he always tries to perform good deeds anyway, but is left wondering what wrong he did previously, or if it was even him that did it. He ponders that if karma is a force, then it is simply something that he is powerless against.
Some other person whose karma and soul got passed into me, but then I was born with a new original brain, uninfluenced by those past lives, just ready and new with karma in the background.
Dax talks about being recognized in the ice cream parlor, mainly for 21 Jump Street. He says some instances are positive, some uncomfortable, such as one customer who tried to sneak pictures of him. He tells us about a positive instance of being recognized by an animator whose team had used him as inspiration for a character in a film they'd been working on.
When I got home, I looked the movie up and saw it's called Spies in Disguise and comes out around Christmas. I'll definitely go see it.
His efforts for moving forward with his career aren't confined to the screen, however. Dax tells us about an idea for an invention that he had while on the verge of being completely broke. It was for an indoor garden linked to an app which would use UV light and could water itself automatically. He created a Kickstarter which was successfully funded and began filming the entire process of starting his business.
I filmed the whole process, but at the end of the month I realized the money wasn't going to come in time and that I'd have to get a real job instead. So I set the invention aside while I began driving Lyft and began doing a food delivery job, and I never ended up pursuing the invention again.
Back to screenwriting, Dax talks about trying to adapt one of his movie ideas into a series, but struggles. He says that he thinks his best chance for success is with the game show idea he's been mulling over for a while, what would become Smoothie Madness.
If I shot the pilot and it came out well, I could try to pitch it to YouTube or some network or something, and if the stars aligned, maybe it'd work out.
This rhetoric of stars aligning manifests into a prayer-like gesture from Dax. He finds himself on his knees on Hollywood Boulevard. His hands are in the concrete prints left by Robert De Niro.
I was waiting for some inspiration to enter me. I was trying to absorb some kind of energy. I don't know what I was doing. A few months later, I released my documentary.
This is in reference to the documentary about his indoor garden project. We now go back to the ice cream parlor as Dax has a chance encounter with Hollywood actor Ryan Gosling and his family. Seemingly remembering him from an audition years before, he asks how he is and congratulates Dax when he tells him about the documentary. Dax's next reflection on fame leaves a bitter taste though. He discusses the singer-songwriter and former YouTuber Charlie Puth. Puth left hate comments on some of Dax's early videos, specifically criticizing his singing and musical ability. He describes his bitterness and discouragement at the fact that Puth managed to attain a legitimate music career in the years afterwards.
This is why I think karma is based on past lives rather than your current life, because if it was based on your current life, Charlie would be lying face down in a gutter, begging for crumbs.
We now come towards the end of the book, and of the summer, and are witness to a strangely poignant moment, if more of a general observation than any musings on fame or Dax's career. After a closing shift, Dax wakes early, and to clear his head, he decides to get out into nature and drives to his favourite hiking spot. There, beside a quiet stream in the forest, he spots on the ground a baby bat with a broken wing. It tries to fly but can only flutter short distances. He stays a while wondering what he can do to help it. He scares away a lizard that he thinks is hunting the bat and continues to watch it.
Other than that though, I didn't know what to do, so when it crawled up under the log and out of my sight, I wished it good luck and began walking back. But I tell you what, when you're in love, it's really something special.
Lastly, we come to Ice Cream Man's meditation on love and relationships. This thread leads to the lengthiest chapters and the heart of the loose story through the book. The third chapter is titled Sex, an abrupt departure from the themes of the two preceding it.
I've only had sex once since my ex-girlfriend and I broke up.
Dax describes this encounter in detail. He meets a girl through Tinder, they arrange a date at a bar, and once there, they immediately hit it off. He relates how quickly things seem to move with this girl, as opposed to his previous relationship.
And within 30 or so minutes, we were kissing by the dance floor. It was like a movie. It was so special.
The girl suggests to Dax that they go back to his apartment. Though slightly flustered by how quickly things are moving, Dax complies. They take a taxi there, and they have sex. It's after this, however, that things get a little strange. Dax describes some odd behaviours from her, some of which are just little eccentricities, but others are a little concerning.
She put her hand on my neck and squeezed it and said she wanted me to be hers and no one else's. I said I wanted the same thing. She squeezed harder, choking me a little, and I didn't know what to say, and then she stopped.
They text back and forth after this, and despite some erratic behaviour from her, Dax agrees to a second date, this time at her apartment. Dax begins to feel intense trepidation as he is sat in her kitchen, watching her prepare food with a knife. He tells her that he needs to go out into the hallway to make a phone call.
I went and stood in the hallway, took a couple deep breaths, and then without even thinking, I was speed walking down the hall to the elevator, and then I was in my car driving home.
Over the course of the next few months, he tries a couple of times to text her back. He doesn't receive any reply. Dax says that this encounter made her the third girl he'd ever kissed, besides a girl he'd met on a road trip when he was younger and his ex. The next chapter in this vein sees Dax reminisce on his days travelling.
I didn't know how to fill my days, and I was quite rich, so I traveled around, stayed in hostels, wrote movie ideas, talked to strangers, wrote a book, and looked for love.
He elaborates on a trip to Russia when he was younger. This came about because a magazine editor heard about his first book, I'm Just Sitting on a Fence, his travel memoir, and invited him to Moscow for a literary event. The stage Dax was at in his romantic life at the time was one of indecision. He was living in LA and had met the girl that would eventually become his girlfriend.
But at the time, I was just obsessed with her, and we weren't together yet, and I didn't know how to woo her.
In the wintertime, he flies out to Russia. Upon arrival, he spends a day walking around the city with the magazine editor. They strike up a close bond very quickly, and Dax asks her for her advice on how to act on his feelings for the girl back home. He reads an extract from his book at the event, which is relayed by a translator. He feels the audience didn't have much of a response, but enjoys his time there. He flies back to Los Angeles, putting the editor's love advice into practice.
And a few months later, I had a girlfriend for the first time.
In a bittersweet chapter, Dax recounts the nature of this relationship. He describes how, for a while after it ended, he would watch her vlogs, but made himself stop. He says the reason they broke up was because his girlfriend wanted the freedom to get to know herself better. She told him they should refrain from talking for 3 months to help get over each other. Dax says that he broke this rule before the 3 months were up, and ended up pushing her away. Despite this, he reflects positively on the experience.
I don't regret anything because I got to experience something really special, and I know that she loved me for a bit too, so I have no complaints. None at all.
We also see love affect the people around Dax to such a significant extent that mention of their situations makes its way into his overwhelmingly self-focused narrative. One of his co-workers talks to him about returning home to New York for the holidays, where he'll buy his girlfriend an engagement ring and find an imaginative way to propose. Dax suggests he do it at the ice cream parlor so that the staff can come together to make it special. He replies that he'd rather keep it separate from his job. Dax goes on to mention a separate colleague in a more offhand fashion.
Another one of my coworkers is moving to Kansas next week because there's a guy there she thinks she may be in love with. It's interesting to see how everyone's life unfolds.
We now reach Ice Cream Man's final chapter, called A Wonderful Feeling. It reads as a kind of epilogue, separated from the rest of the text by a series of pictures of the ice cream parlor. Dax receives an email from his ex-girlfriend saying that she'd like to be friends and asking to meet up. He agrees. He waits for her in a park and begins to feel nervous and apprehensive.
And then, after 2 years of not talking, there she was, walking across the grass, waving hi. We shared a brief hug, walked around, sat down, talked. We became friends again. It felt very strange, but very good.
He describes going into work the next day with a feeling of bliss. Not even his manager can bother him that day.
It was like I'd received the answer to a question I didn't know I'd been asking. I don't know what the question was or what the answer is, but that's how it felt.
After work, Dax, riding on this wave of positive feeling, gets in his car and drives back to his favorite hiking spot. He describes an idyllic evening scene with the sky above the city lit by the setting sun.
So what if they drop 1 million atom bombs and blow everything up? So what if an earthquake swallows me and the rest of LA up? The sky looks pretty right now and I feel so good.
Sitting in this spot, he notices the flutter of a bird to his right, but looking closer he sees that it's not a bird, it's a bat. A bat that looks about the same size as the one with the broken wing that he'd seen a month earlier. And with this image in mind, we get the conclusion of Ice Cream Man.
Even though I was on the complete opposite side of town, I had a feeling it was that very bat, or at least I hoped it was, and it felt like it'd come to visit me, to show me that it'd made it, that it'd finally learned to fly.
I was keenly aware of the central assumption that I'd made going into Ice Cream Man. that it would provide me with a greater clarity of the internal workings of Dax Flame's mind, and that it would somehow reveal itself as one big in-character piece. Categorically, it did not satisfy that central question. Through reading Ice Cream Man, the perspective from which I came to look at it changed entirely. It's not wall-to-wall Smoothie Madness-esque awkwardness, and despite the honesty and openness of some of its admissions, it didn't lead to me feeling as though I had any clearer image of who the man behind it really is. Rather than an autobiographical document, I came to look at Ice Cream Man as a literary artifact, and the character of Dax as just that. To appreciate him from this perspective, I found it necessary to conceive of him not as an extension of the internet personality, but as a self-contained self-insert, regardless of whether this was the author's intention. Instead, I developed a different question entirely, that of Ice Cream Man's style. Despite searching for evidence otherwise, I find it most probable that Dax is simply recounting events that actually happened, just as they were, with no stylization or heightening of reality, which might mark it out as a semi-autobiographical novel. There is undoubtedly self-awareness in Ice Cream Man, but one that varies in its prevalence from chapter to chapter. Dax's more personal, introspective observations differ in this way from his recounting of interactions with co-workers. Through the whole book, there kept appearing flashes that gave me pause to think. Ice Cream Man is genuinely humorous, not just through the awkwardness that shines through in Dax's personality, but with real wit and observations. Ice Cream Man is absolutely at its best when it contrasts the humor of one chapter with a gut punch of pessimism or sadness in the next. I was continually surprised by how effectively it achieved this. And there is an undeniable story-like quality to the way Dax describes events that makes them extremely readable. Each scene is like a little memorable tableau, even if there's a feeling of disparateness and a lack of proper resolution throughout. In a sense, I was dissatisfied. I felt that subtle signs of artistry were hiding within Ice Cream Man somewhere, but just couldn't find enough of them to justify reading it like a true piece of fiction. Intentional or not, the unfolding of Ice Cream Man is confused and unfocused. However, this definitely shouldn't be taken as me saying that the writing is weak. Perhaps the book tricked me into trying to look for patterns or for artistry, precisely because the way that Dax describes things is so charming and readable. It might seem an obvious answer that Dax simply threw together this collection of notes to publish on a whim, but the genuine moments of poignancy gave me cause to at least consider the alternative. So, indulging my impulse to look deeper, despite the fact that nothing so intended may be there, what can we learn from Ice Cream Man? Despite showing vindictive flashes at times, there's a persistent optimism and faith in Dax's view of the world, one which comes into conflict with his own feelings. His observations and internal conflicts reveal these sweet, slightly awkward expressions of acceptance that make his perspective quite endearing. A word that stands out to me when I think about Ice Cream Man is earnestness. Earnestness is in the selection and style of what's written, in the depth and range of emotions that are on show, and the dreams and aspirations of its author. The earnestness in his struggle to improve shows itself through how, within the confines of his role, Dax goes out of his way to do what in his view is the best for the people around him, despite the admission that the job is something that he hates. In a world where it sometimes feels as though earnestness is a crime because of its danger to self-awareness, this alone is praiseworthy. Faith is something that's also ever-present in Ice Cream Man, sometimes to its protagonist's detriment. On the positive side, it's Dax's faith in optimism and faith in success, should he continue to keep plugging away. More negatively, faith manifests itself in the difficult concept of self-actualization being deserved. This may be a contributing factor to some complacency in following through on his schemes to find success, and in the acidity that he directs towards his manager and Charlie Puth. By his logic, they are undeserving of their positions. In this sense, the idea of karma runs through the entire narrative and significantly impacts Dax's way of thinking. Specifically, my mind returns to the image of the baby bat. If an intentional metaphor, the parallels with Dax's career woes are obvious. It hints at a narrative of growth, of blossoming into something predestined. However, perhaps the character of Dax is falling into the trap of thinking that reaching those heights, of finding the ability to fly as it were, is just a natural occurrence for which he must wait. He wants to believe that the bat he sees at the end under the evening sky is the same bat as he saw the month before. However, Dax even admits the odds of that are low. A more cynical view might even dictate that the bat with the broken wing would never have attained those heights. That said, like earnestness, I certainly can't begrudge someone for possessing such faith. The parts of Ice Cream Man that made the biggest impression on me, and that I found the most poignant, were its reflections on love. Dax's admission on his breakup is incredibly honest and sad, made all the more so by his magnanimity in retaining only positive feelings about the relationship. At least he declares that he has no complaints. But I don't find psychoanalyzing very productive, so I'm happy to take that statement at its word, even if it does sound bittersweet. The revelry in the memories of both his relationship and his travels go to highlight another persistent theme through the rest of the book: loneliness and isolation. Being an incredibly self-focused book, we see the main character largely in private moments of self-reflection. When there are other people involved, their role is largely to play into Dax's internal struggles and anxieties. We can take the Tinder date as the most explicit case of this. Not only does the speed with which she seems to be rushing into intimacy cause Dax to worry and compare it to his previous relationship, but she crosses a physical boundary as well. She intrudes into his space and very explicitly violates his autonomy by holding his neck. It's really no wonder that her mere presence causes Dax deep uncertainty from then on, not least when she's holding a knife. And it's from this idea that we might be able to draw out some sort of character arc for Dax. The next and only other time we see physical affection or contact expressed in the book is in the hug he shares with his ex in the final chapter. The transformative effect of this on our protagonist is blatant. And it's right at the end, sitting watching the sunset, we see that he has found a kind of self-actualization, or at least a satisfaction in simply being alone. Just as we saw in his apartment on a sunny Saturday morning, he loves life. Except now, this extends even to his workplace. Discerning meanings and significance from Ice Cream Man is only possible if you abandon the perspective of the outsider looking in, the perspective that originally led me to pick up this book. From an outsider's perspective, everything in Ice Cream Man is small. The points of conflict are small. Dax's arc, the positive change he experiences, is small. It's only by engaging with and appreciating Dax's honesty that I found I was able to extract something meaningful from the experience of reading it. Is the significance I've drawn from such an unfocused story somewhat contrived? Possibly. Am I saying that Ice Cream Man is a hidden masterpiece? No. Its lack of finish is something that did leave me feeling dissatisfied. There's an inescapable feeling from the conclusions that I've been able to make that perhaps with some planning, some structure, and maybe even some light fictionalized elements, it could be so much more than it is. However, I fully admit that I can't even pretend to guess what Dax Flame truly intended in writing Ice Cream Man. Nor would I presume to recommend changes that might change its essence from what it is. In Ice Cream Man, there is, at the very least, the core of something truthful. It's a picture of loneliness, struggle, and hope of a young man living urban life in the 21st century. If you take it just as it is, it's still interesting. I would recommend Ice Cream Man. It'll only cost you about an hour of your time. I didn't find it to be a waste of mine in the slightest.